You know, it was a ballot fight, so it was an electoral fight. In electoral strategy, there can be a debate that if you're going to try to win the election, you've got to speak to the likely voters, and that tends to mean middle-class white voters. And I think because of the coalition and the basis of our constituencies, we really based a lot of our work on where Filipinos, African Americans, Latinos, Samoans live and work and vote.
On January 1st, 2012, San Francisco's minimum wage became the first in the nation to pass the $10 mark. The lowest wage workers will now earn $10.24 an hour. The city's minimum wage is tied to and adjusted for inflation. For most of the country, the minimum wage is not at all tied to inflation, and therefore has lost value in real terms.
Low-wage workers in California in general, and in San Francisco specifically, are more likely to be people of color. If we look at sort of what are the biggest anti-poverty measures that we've seen in California in years, that San Francisco, and both the living wage laws and the minimum wage laws have had a tremendous effect.
San Francisco's minimum wage is different because of a law enacted as a result of Proposition L, a city ballot measure fought for and won by a coalition of organized labor and a diverse network of community-based progressive organizations back in 2003. The alliance was particularly rooted in communities of color and low-wage workers not typically represented by traditional unions.
We did a march where we went to Taco Bell and marched to a number of the minimum wage employers around the downtown just to even make visible, you know, the person who's making your food right now at lunch, they're making out of a year $14,000.
$14,000 a year before taxes, in a city with one of the highest costs of living in the country. In 2003, as the debate over Proposition L took place, the cost of living stood at 184% above the national average, with housing costs over 300% the national average.
And we knew at that time $850 wasn't high enough, but various studies and polls had been done, and that was the threshold at which people thought we could win at the ballot.
Unfortunately, there's still huge gaps. Even with the highest minimum wage in the country, low-wage workers can't survive in one of the most expensive cities in the country and in the world. If you combine that with the lack of affordable housing and the lack of access to other services, it's just disastrous.
In the face of continued hardship for low-wage workers in San Francisco, the coalition of community organizations that united to bring in the wage increase continued to work together to tackle the range of issues affecting their memberships. The Progressive Workers Alliance itself is a lesson the individual organizations have learned from the minimum wage fight of 2003.
We felt it was really important that just because Filipino caregivers face a certain kind of exploitation like 24-hour shifts, and day laborers, get picked up and dropped off and sometimes abandoned at their work site without pay, and that restaurant workers work for monthly salaries and get their tips stolen, and that they face maybe slightly different conditions in their workplaces, but in the end, their root cause of their exploitation is the same.
San Francisco Progressive Workers Alliance really made a splash at City Hall because our rallies and press conferences and lobby visits were multi-ethnic, multiracial, had young and old. We were able to show the powers that be in the city that we were a force to reckon with.
There's very few organizations that are truly membership-led that represent those communities. To be able to have a low-wage worker herself or himself be engaged in the fight to improve their conditions, it's a very different power that we bring to the table.
Some women in our group that says, you know what, Donaji, I'm not gonna accept this job if they don't offer me at least the minimum wage. And that's very, very nice, because you know that behind that decision is like, I don't have a job for many months and I have a lot of bills and it's gonna be very hard for me, but I'm not going to be a step back in this decision, because it's very important and it's something that we already win.
In some ways, our biggest criticism out of it was $850 wasn't high enough. It didn't really move the base and the working class, and I think now as it's starting to raise and go above $10 an hour, and as it begins to increase, I think we're going to start to see workers really feeling the impact of that struggle. And so the tangible victories, I think, is a really key part of how people gain the confidence to continue fighting.